So I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawm ad-din, iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een, ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim ghayra al-maghdubi alayhim wa lad-dallin, sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله ولا أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. So the verse of Quran that's going to make up the what we call unwan or heading of tonight's session and next week's session is from Quran, Surah As-Saf, the chapter of the ranks, 61st chapter of the Quran, verse number 8. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they desire to extinguish the light of God with their mouths, and God will perfect His light, however much the disbelievers hate it. So I want you to hold on to that verse for the next hour. We'll come back to it twice, and the second time, God willing, you will hear something in it that I promise you have never noticed before. But let me start somewhere else. There is a sentence in a Sunni chronicle that has been very difficult for me to put down. The chronicle is called The Well-Ordered Account of the History of Kings and Nations, and its author is someone called Ibn al-Jawzi, who is a Hanbali scholar from Baghdad, writing well over a century after the thing he describes happened. And he's recording the sack of a house. He lists what was carried out of it and burnt, the notebooks and a chair, and then this. And he says, in the reference of course you can find in the write-up, and to it were added 3 white banners, which the visitors from the people of Karkh used in the old days, to carry with them when they set out for the visitation of Kufa, and all of it was burnt. Now I'll read you that entry in full later with everything that comes before it. Tonight, right now, I just want that one clause. The word for what the pilgrims were doing, Ziyarat al-Kufa, the visitation of Kufa. This is the word you will use every time you talk about going to Kufa or to Najaf. But I have to tell you something, and I would rather tell you now than have you find out later. There is a word in that sentence that is wrong. Not wrong in my translation, but wrong in the book, in the printed edition, in the manuscripts behind it, and it's been wrong for 1,000 years. I've translated the word as banners, because that is for sure certainly what it means. But the Arabic in front of me does not say banners. Keep that in your mind, we'll come back to it again. And when we do, you will find out what happens to that sentence is the same thing that happened to the man. Stay with that for a while. Somebody went into a house that day and looked for the flags that ordinary people carried on the road to the shrine of the Commander of the Faithful, peace and blessings be upon him. And they carried them out into the street and they put them in the fire with the books. Understand what that is. They were not burning property, they were burning a direction. And here is what this majlis, this sermon is about. The man whose house that was, he walked the road himself, not as a pilgrim, but as a resident. He went and he lived beside that grave, and he taught there until he died, and by his own will, he was buried inside his own house. And that house is today a mosque. You can go and pray in it. They burnt the banners that pointed to Najaf, and the man walked to Najaf. And that is the whole of tonight in a single sentence. And every clause of it comes from a Sunni chronicle. We don't need a single source of our own to prove any of it. So now let's go back to the verse for the first time. I told you we would return to it. Quran, Surah As-Saf, the chapter of the ranks, 61st chapter of the Quran, verse number 8. They desired to extinguish the light of God with their mouths, and God will perfect His light, however much the disbelievers hate it. They desire to extinguish the light of God with their mouths. Now, there's a verse that's almost exactly like that one in Surah Tawbah, the chapter of the repentance. And the difference between them is a single word. And that difference is the whole of tonight. So in Quran, Surah Tawbah, the chapter of the repentance, 9th chapter of the Quran, verse number 32, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "They intend to extinguish the light of God with their mouths, but God refuses except to perfect his light, although the disbelievers dislike it." Now let's pause here for a moment to explain, because Allama pauses on it too. In Surah Tawbah, it is, "They intend to extinguish." And in our verse from Surah Saf, it is, "They intend so that they may extinguish." And Allama quotes from Ar-Raghib al-Isfahani, and if you want to know who that is, please go to the write-up, look at footnote number 1, on what that changes. It'll be very interesting to find out who Raghib al-Isfahani is. Allama says, and the difference between the two places is that in "they intend to extinguish," they intend to extinguish of God's light itself. And in "so that they may extinguish," they intend a thing by means of which they may arrive at extinguishing the light of God. The reference is all in the write-up. Now that was Allama quoting Raghib al-Isfahani. Then Allama gives his own summary of it. He says, "The upshot is that the object of the intention in 'they intend to extinguish the light of God' is the extinguishing itself. And in 'they intend so that they may extinguish the light of God,' it is the cause that leads to the extinguishing, which is the blowing with their mouths, while the extinguishing is the purpose and the end." And of course the references in the write-up. Now I know this sounds a little bit technical, but I hope you can hear what this gives us tonight. This verse is not about the goal. It is about the instrument. And Allama tells us why the image is a mouth at all. He says, again, the reference is all in the write-up, "As a candle is put out with a puff of breath, a figure for the fact that they suppose the light of God, which is his religion, to be a weak light, like the light of a candle put out by the slightest breath. They thought it was a candle, so in Karkh they reached for an instrument. And they did not use their mouths, they used fire, which is a serious instrument, and they used the state, which is a far more serious one. And yet it made no difference. And tonight I want to show you exactly why it made no difference. Because the reason was not a miracle or something supernatural. It was, and it is, a design. So, let me tell you now why I'm going to spend maybe an hour of your evening on perhaps a piece of furniture. Every one of us is standing on something or sitting on something. Not a building, though alhamdulillah we have them and we are grateful for them. I mean the thing underneath that. The thing that would still be there if the building were not. And most of us have never once been asked to name it. We've never had to. That is what it means to live in a settled place, in a settled time. And it is a mercy, and I do not wish the alternative on anybody in this room or outside. But it has a cost, and the cost is this. A people who have never had to name what holds them up do not know what holds them up. And they find out in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time, from the people who worked it out before they did. Somebody worked it out about us, about the Shia, once in a city that is now rubble. He made a list. He went and he got the things on the list, one at a time, and put them in a fire in the street where everybody could see. And he was wrong. Not about the list was very good. He was wrong about what those things were made of. Tonight I want to walk you through his list, and then I want to ask you what would be on yours. Because the question underneath this whole evening is one you will not be asked politely when it finally comes. What actually protects a people when the state turns upon them? I will tell you the answer now so that you can spend the hour with me watching as we prove it rather than just waiting for it. And the answer is, it is not a building. Please give me a loud salawat and we move on to the recap, a short recap of what we did last week, what we carry forward.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
So before we go into the fire, let me set us down gently, because tonight does not stand on its own. Last week we spent an hour, a bit more than an hour, building a man. Tonight we watch them burn what he built. We are in the architecture of guidance. This is the 10th part of it. And beginning at the 9th part, we opened a smaller sequence inside it of 10 sessions called The House Beside the Grave. Tonight is the second of those 10. Last week was the first. And the whole 10 are asking one question from 10 different directions. How does the guidance of the Imam of our age, may our souls be his ransom and may God hasten his return, reach us while he is absent? So 3 things from last week, and the third is the one that matters more tonight. First, the man, Shaykh Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn al-Hassan al-Tusi, though our tradition does not usually call him that. It calls him Shaykh al-Ta'ifa, the Shaykh of the community. Not a compliment, but a title, and nobody has seriously contested it in 1,000 years. A boy from Tus and Khurasan who came to Baghdad as a young man in the year 408 of the Hijra and never went home. 23 years at the feet of one teacher, 2 of the 4 books on which the whole of our jurisprudence stands, compiled by his hand. Second, the chair, an actual wooden chair, an appointed seat, given to him in the capital of the Muslim world for the teaching of theology. We spent time on that chair last week. Keep a hold of it. It comes back tonight, and it does not come back well. Third, and most importantly, in the year 447 of the Hijra, in a city already coming apart around him, he finished a book about the occultation of the Imam of our age, may our souls be his ransom and may God hasten his return. And he wrote the book, and he wrote the year into the book himself, in his own hand, in the first person. A book about how guidance survives an absence, written by a man about to lose everything that he had. We will read a sentence to you before the night is out, God willing. And one more thing, which the calendar gave us, and not me. Last week fell on the 28th of Safar, the demise of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, his family, and righteous companions. And the Messenger of God was buried in the room he died in, the first house beside a grave. That is where this little sequence, alhamdulillah, got its name. So that is where we left him, at the very height of it. And it brings us back, as every week does, to the question this whole series has been asking since session 61. What are you building? And what are you becoming? Tonight, we watch them burn it. And next week, God willing, we find out what they could not reach. So first of all, where are we going? 3 points. Number 1, how a city changes hands. Who came to Baghdad and why and what they actually wanted. Number 2, what they came for. The inventory of what was destroyed, which is the most revealing list in this entire session. And 3, what could not be burnt. This has been deferred to next week. And that is where we find the answer to the question underneath all of it. What protects a people when the state turns upon them? And it was his house, the man I've just been describing to you, the one with the chair. Tonight he loses everything he owns, and we find out what he had that could not be taken. Please give me a salawat. We move to the first of the 3 points, how a city changes hands.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
So before I can tell you what happened in Karkh, I have to tell you who was standing in Baghdad, and I'm going to tell it fairly. A sermon that misrepresents its opponent is a sermon that can be taken apart, and a sermon that can be taken apart protects nobody. So they were Turkic Oghuz, what we call Ghuz in Arabic sources, a confederation of tribes that had been moving west across the grasslands for centuries. Their family was of the Qiniq. The eponym is Seljuk ibn Duqaq, whose father carried the nickname Temur Yaliq, which means iron bow. They broke with their Oghuz overlords and they went south to Jand on the lower Sir Darya. Now let me place that for you because I suspect those two names mean nothing to most of us, but they should. The Sir Darya is one of the two great rivers of Central Asia. The Greeks called it the Jaxartes, and the Arab geographers call it the Sayhun. It comes down off the mountains and runs out into the Aral Sea. And the other one, the Oxus, which we will meet momentarily, because they cross it. These two rivers cross. And Jand sat near the mouth of that river, out on the open steppe, in what is today's southern Kazakhstan. Now hold that map in your head for a moment, because the distance is the point. That is about 1,400 or so miles from Baghdad. 1,400 miles of grass and desert and mountain. Not a single road that you could call a road. Further than London is from anywhere most of us have driven. That is where this family is, at the point where our story picks them up. Not on the edge of the Muslim world, outside it, looking in. And yet within 3 generations, they will be sitting in Baghdad deciding what the call to prayer is allowed to say. And Islam came to them there. Now let me be careful with that sentence, because the honest scholarship is to be careful with it. The Encyclopedia Iranica, in its article on the Seljuks, calls the accounts of their origin semi-legendary. And when a reference work of that standing hedges, we have no choice but to hedge with it. So I will say only what can be said. The traditions place their entry into Islam at Jand, in the closing years of the 4th century after the Hijra. The first hard date is the year 382 of the Hijra, or around 992 in the reckoning of the West, when they appear on a battlefield as Muslims fighting alongside the Samanids. They were Hanafi in their law, in their jurisprudence, and they stayed Hanafi. Now a detail, and I give it to you along with its uncertainty. Seljuk gave his sons the names Mikail, Israel, Musa, and Yunus. That is Michael, Israel, Moses, and Jonah. These are not Turkic names. Scholars have argued about what that means for a century and more, and have not settled it, and I'm not going to settle it for them tonight. I raise it so that you can see these people as they actually were. A family 1 or 2 generations off the grassland, whose grandfather's religion nobody today can name with confidence. And within 3 generations, they will be the arbiters of orthodoxy in Baghdad. Hold on to that, it matters before the hour is out. So around the year 426 of the Hijra, around 1035 of the Common Era, roughly 10,000 Oghuz under Seljuk leadership crossed the Oxus into Khorasan. By 429, that's around 1038, they have taken Nishapur, and the Friday sermon is read in Tughril Beg's name, the Seljuk Khalif, in his name for the first time. And in 431, around 1040 of the Common Era, comes the Battle of Dandana Khan. Tughril Beg and his brother Chagri Beg break the Ghaznavid Sultan in the field. Khorasan is theirs. Rey, which is now the southern part of modern Tehran, falls by 434. Isfahan by 443. That's around 1051. And after Dandana Khan, they divide the work. Tughril Beg takes the west, and Chagri Beg holds Khorasan. Remember that, because the whole of this point rests on it. Khorasan is held, and Khorasan goes on supplying the empire, its administrators, its judges, and its religious personnel. The religious character of the Seljuk state was manufactured in Nishapur. It was not manufactured in Baghdad. We're going to need that in a few minutes. So I'm now going to compress about a century into 90 seconds because it's scaffolding and it's not the building. The Buyids will get their own majlis, God willing, in a couple of weeks. In the year 334, around 945, a Buyid emir walks into Baghdad and takes the title Amir al-Umara, which means commander of the commanders. And for 113 years, if you look at the Hijri reckoning, or 110 if you look at the Gregorian reckoning, the Khalif reigns and the Buyids rule. Now there's a temptation here, and I want to resist it in front of you. The temptation is, because the Buyids rule, and the Buyids we've discussed previously were Shia, at least superficially, the temptation is to call that the Shia century. The careful scholarship will not let us say that, and I would rather be careful than be comfortable. The Encyclopedia Iranica, in its article on the Buyid dynasty, puts it evidentially rather than as a verdict. It says, and the reference you can find in the write-up, it cannot be established that there was a determined attack on Sunniism, at least in Iraq. Now hear the precision of that. Not that there was no such attack. It cannot be established. That's a historian refusing to claim more than his evidence can carry. And it is exactly the discipline that this sermon keeps asking of both you and me. The Buyids kept the Abbasid Khalif in place rather than replacing him. There were Sunni Turkish contingents in Iraq. A policy of enforcing Shiism would have led to a disaster, and the Buyids knew it. So here is what is true, and it is both more accurate and more useful. It was a century in which Shia scholarship could be done openly, at the highest level, in the capital of the Muslim world. That is what was actually gained. And that is precisely what was about to be lost. By the 440s, the Buyid order has collapsed. Fragmentation, army factionalism, fiscal ruin, and a government that can no longer police its own streets. Now the part that reframes everything, and most people have never really heard this. The Khalif at the time, the Abbasid Khalif, is al-Qa'im bi-Amrillah. He's been in office from 422 to 467, which is a very long time, a very long reign, yet a reign with very little authority or power in it. The Encyclopedia of Islam sums up his early decades in a single sentence, and it's a bleak one. Hardly a day passes in the capital without turmoil. You can find the reference in the write-up. 45 years on the throne, and that's the summary. And he has a very specific problem. A Turkish commander of the collapsing Buyid establishment has gone over to the Fatimids in Cairo. Let me pause here to explain, because if you don't know what the Fatimids were, the Caliph's panic makes no sense. So there was a second caliphate in Egypt, in the city of Cairo. There sat another man who called himself the commander of the faithful and the successor to the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, his family and righteous companions. And unlike the man in Baghdad, he was an Ismaili Shia, and he claimed descent from Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her. He had wealth Baghdad no longer had. He had an army that Baghdad no longer had. And he had missionaries organized, funded and patient, working in every city of the Muslim world, including Baghdad. So understand what the Khalif in Baghdad is looking at. A rival Khalif of a rival branch of Islam, with money, with soldiers, and with agents inside his own capital. And now one of his own commanders has taken the Fatimid coin. So the Khalif writes a letter. He writes to Tughril Beg, and he asks him to come. Now let me be plain, because this is the hinge of the whole point. The Seljuks did not arrive in Baghdad uninvited. The Khalif sent for them. Tughril Beg reaches Baghdad in the month of Ramadan in the year 447, which is around December of 1055. The sources give the day as around the 24th or the 25th, so I'm not going to pretend to know exactly which. He comes officially as a pilgrim bound for Mecca, and he swears loyalty to the Abbasid Khalif and to the Buyid Emir, both of them. Yet within days, the Emir's name is out of the Friday sermon. And by the end of the month, he, the Buyid Emir, is under arrest over the Abbasid Khalif's own protest. He dies a prisoner at Rey. He is the last Buyid to rule Iraq. Now, because I've been saying this word Karkh all evening, and even last week, and I've not really told you what it was. Karkh was the great market quarter of Baghdad on the west bank of the Tigris River. It wasn't a village, it wasn't a ghetto, it was a commercial engine. Merchants, cloth dealers, guilds, warehouses, money, and it was overwhelmingly Shia. Now, I could describe it from a modern history book, but I would rather describe it out of the chronicles themselves, in the chronicler's own vocabulary, because his words tell you more about the shape of the place than any summary of mine could. He speaks of the doors of the houses. He speaks of, you can find all these references in the write-up, he speaks of the heads of the lanes. And the word he uses is ad-durub. A darb, which is a singular, is not a street in our sense. In Iran, you would call them like a kuche. It's a lane with a mouth to it, in a way that a body could stand in it and be seen standing in it. Named lanes with entrances, streets you could stand at the top of and see all the way down. And he speaks of the pilgrims of the people of Iraq, of Karkh, as a body who, in the olden days, used to carry banners together on the road to Kufa. So do you hear what that builds? A dense, walkable, self-aware quarter where people knew whose door was whose and where the whole street went on pilgrimage together. Now put two more things beside it. To the north, at a place the sources call the graveyard of Quraysh, Maqabir Quraysh, stood the shrine we know today as Kadhimiyyah or Kadhimain, the resting place of Imam Musa al-Kadhim and Imam Muhammad Jawad, peace and blessings be upon them both. And across the water on the east bank sat Bab al-Basra, a staunchly Sunni quarter that had been fighting Karkh on and off for generations. That fight was old and ugly and nothing to do with religion, I hasten to add. And it had blood on both sides of it. Now, I'm not going to tell you that our quarter or the Shi'i quarter, Karkh, was innocent in it, because that would not be true. So this is the city that Tughril Beg rode into. A capital with two caliphs claiming it, a bankrupt government, a rival commander in the pay of Cairo, and two quarters at each other's throats since before anyone alive could remember. Hold that picture because it's about to be set on fire. And now a small correction because it protects everything that follows. We have to be accurate about 447. Karkh was not put to the torch the night that Tughril Beg arrived. And I say that clearly because the story is often told that way and the story is wrong. What the chroniclers describe in 1447 is soldiery looting, the commons rising and killing soldiers, the old street war between Karkh and Bab al-Basra flaring at the two bridges. That is a city coming apart and it is terrible and people died in it. But it is not yet the thing this majlis is named for. That comes the following year. And the honest answer to the first question anybody asks. So, did they come to crush us? No. They came because an Abbasid Khalif, fighting for his own political survival against a Fatimid-funded general, sent for them. Their project was an empire. His, the Khalif's project, was to still be Khalif in the morning. Karkh was not the object of the policy. Karkh was what the policy went over the top of. And I'm not going to stand here or sit here and claim that there was a standing empire-wide, doctrinally driven program against the Shia, because the evidence does not support it. And because our own material in the point next week contradicts it. So, now the fact that turns everything I say tonight from being a slogan into an actual demonstration, the purge before ours. Before I take you into Karkh, I want to show you what this state, the Seljuks, did to the Sunnis. Because if you don't see this first, you will misunderstand everything that follows. Tughril Beg's first vizier was a Khurasani. He was Hanafi in his jurisprudence, and he's reported to have been Mu'tazili in creed. And from around the years 445 and 446, that's around 1053 to 1054, he had the cursing of the Ash'aris written into the Friday sermon at Nishapur. Now the Mu'tazilis and the Ash'aris, we've covered them before. I invite everyone to review the write-ups and find the links. So they had written into the sermons, in the Friday sermons, the cursing of the Ash'aris by an order of the state 2 years before Baghdad. Al-Juwayni, who is the teacher of al-Ghazali, one of the greatest minds of that or any century, left Khurasan for the Hijaz. Al-Qushayri left too and wrote a formal complaint about what had been done. These are all senior scholars from among the Sunnah. They were driven out of their own countries. And the historians read the motive as political rather than theological, clearing the high offices for the Hanafis. It was reversed after 455 of the Hijra. The vizier who ordered it was imprisoned and he was executed within the year. Let me be very plain about what that actually means. The first religious purge carried out by the Seljuks was not aimed at the Shia. It was aimed at the Sunnis, at the most eminent Sunni scholars of the age, including one of them who taught Imam Ghazali. So when I tell you what happened in Karkh, I'm not going to tell you that Sunnis did it to Shia. I'm going to tell you that a state-discovered orthodoxy is an extremely efficient weapon and used it on whoever was standing in front of it. That year, it was the Ash'aris in Nishapur. The next year, it would be us, the Shia. It's not Shia against Sunni. It is the truth against the abuse of truth. Now, that is not a slogan I'm asking you to accept on my word. That is the documented sequence of events. And now I'm going to argue with myself. There is a thing you will hear said about this period with great confidence, and I'm not going to say it. You will hear, and you might have heard this term, Nizamiya madrasas. You will hear that the Nizamiya madrasas were built to destroy Shiism, and that Karkh was their first fruit. That is simply not true. And I want you to be able to defend every single thing you hear from me tonight and subsequent nights and past nights. So let me give you the dates. The Nizamiya of Baghdad, and keep these dates in mind, the Nizamiya madrasas of Baghdad was begun in 457 and it was opened in 459. Nizam al-Mulk, after who it's named, did not become vizier until 455. The events I'm about to describe are 448 and 449, between 8 and 11 years earlier. When that chair was carried into the street and burnt, Nizam al-Mulk held no office. Alp Arsalan was not a sultan. Tughril Beg was alive, and not one Nizamiya existed anywhere on the face of this earth. If we blame the Nizamiyas as some ignorant people do, if we blame the Nizamiyas for Karkh, one well-read opponent takes this entire sermon and tears it apart with a single sentence. And he would be right to. While I am here, he did not invent, Nizam al-Mulk did not invent the madrasa either. Madrasa, or schools, establishments of education, existed in Khurasan long before him. The first institution really deserving the name is placed at Nishapur in the first quarter of this same century. What Nizam al-Mulk did was systematize, endow, network, and politicize it. That is a large thing to have done, but it's nowhere near the same as having invented it. So let's look at some lessons for our time. There are 5 things, and every one of them is about how we read what is happening to us. First, learn the differences between being hated and being incidental. Both burn identically. That is what makes it hard. But they are different situations and they call for different responses. And a community that cannot tell them apart will misread every crisis it ever meets. Seeing malice where there is only indifference, and seeing indifference where there is real malice on its way. Half of what gets called persecution is a state stepping on something on its way somewhere else. That is not a comfort. In some ways, you could say it's worse. But it is the truth, and you cannot respond well to a situation you have described wrongly. And it runs the other way too, and that half costs us more. A man was stabbed to death at a mosque. It went everywhere. It was an attack on Muslims. It was proof of how bad things have become. And there were people on television within the day who were entirely certain of what it meant. In reality, it was a family matter. 2 men of the same faith, of the same family, had a dispute that ended in a building where it should never have been brought. That came out a long time afterwards. And you will perhaps not remember reading it, because the first story was a headline on the front page, and the correction was a few paragraphs buried deep inside the inside pages. Now listen carefully, because this is a knife edge and I want to walk it properly. A man was killed. That is not smaller because the motive turned out to be different. His family did not get him back. And hatred of Muslims is real. And it is not so rare, unfortunately. And I'm not standing on this pulpit to tell you that it's imaginary. What I am telling you is that a community that reaches for the same explanation every time will eventually be wrong. And it will be wrong loudly. And it will be believed a little less the next time it is right. That is the cost. It is not paid by the people who wrote the headlines. It is paid by us later when it matters most. The second, when a report reaches you, the Quran tells you what to do with it. And the word it uses is the word we use for this work. In Quran, Surah Hujurat, the chapter of the chambers, 49th chapter of the Quran, verse number 6, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O you who believe, if a corrupt person comes to you with a report, then verify it, lest you strike a people in ignorance and become regretful over what you have done. Now look at the verb. In Arabic, the word uses fatabayyanu, then make it clear. The root is bayan, the making plain of things, the clarifying of things. And the form the Quran chooses is not the one that means be told. It is the one that means go and establish this for yourself until it stands clear in front of you. That is the word, tabyin, clarification. The thing we say we are doing from this pulpit every week, it's not just a program somebody invented and gave a nice name to. It is a divine imperative written in the book of God. And now I want to give you what Allama Tabatabai does with this verse, because it's more radical than you might expect. He does not treat it as a piece of religious etiquette. He treats it as God ratifying a law of reason. You can find the reference in the write-up. Allama says, in this verse, God, glorified be He, has ratified the principle of acting upon a report. And it is one of the rational principles upon which the very foundation of human social life is built. And He commanded verification in the report of a corrupt person, which carries the sense of a prohibition against acting on his report. And then the sentence, I want this gathering to take home. Again, you can find the reference in the write-up. Allama says, so in the verse, there is an affirmation of what rational people affirm and a denial of what they deny in this matter, and it is an endorsement, not a founding. Imda la ta'sis. An endorsement, not a founding. Imda. Imda is what a man does when he puts his signature to a document somebody else drew up. He didn't write it, and after he signs it, it's binding. Ta'sis is laying a foundation where there was nothing before. God is not adding a religious rule on top of ordinary life. He's signing His name to something reason already knew, and by signing it, He makes it binding. So when somebody tells you that checking a story is a nicety, or that it is for academics, or that there's no time for it, understand that you are being asked what you are being asked to set aside. And notice one more thing. Allama Tabatabai says the reason for the command is not the report at all. Rather, it is the ignorance. Allama says, again, the reference is in the write-up. It indicates that what is commanded is the removal of ignorance and the attainment of knowledge of the report's content at the point when one intends to act upon it. And notice who the verse does not warn you about. It does not say if an enemy comes to you with a report. Rather, it says if a corrupt person comes to you with a report. Someone who may be on your side, in your community, someone you may like, someone you may have been listening to for years. Now let me apply that where it costs us something. We do this to each other. There is amongst us a reflex, an immediate reach for hatred of our brothers of the Sunnah. And when we do it, some of them reciprocate. And when we hold up that reciprocation as proof that we were right in the first place, that's what we do. Who is served by that? Name the beneficiary. I'll wait. And here is the thing that should stop this gathering in its tracks tonight. The version of this very night that most of our people carry in their heads is wrong. They think the Sunni Seljuks came and burnt the Shias of Karkh. And I've heard this said by irresponsible people on the pulpits. I have just spent the best part of an hour showing you that the orders were written by an Abbasid administration. That this same dynasty's first religious purge fell on the scholars of our brethren of the Sunnah. And that a Hanbali historian of Baghdad is the reason we know any of this at all. We accepted a report without verification about our own history, about our own dead. And it was doing work for us, which is why nobody checked. It was simple. It had a villain, and it asked nothing of us. But history is not a film, it's not a movie made by Hollywood. History is nuanced, and it is slow. And the honest version almost never has a clean enemy in it. The third point, ask who benefits from you being at each other's throats. The street war between those two quarters was decades old, and both quarters had blood on them. That was a fight. What changed in 448 was not the level of hatred. It was that one side acquired the machinery of government. Private hatred is a wound. Hatred plus the state is policy. and a policy has a purpose. A population busy hating each other is a population not looking at anything else, not where the money went, not what was sold or to whom or for how much or why. A quarrel in the street is the cheapest lid you can put on a city. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there is a room somewhere with a plan in it. I don't know that. And I'm not going to preach to you what I cannot show you. What I can show you is 448. A state under pressure discovered that a religious question would keep a city occupied and used it. That is documented. That is in the Chronicles. You can go, you can read it. Like I've said, references are in the write-up. So take the mechanism, not the conspiracy. When you find yourself furious with your neighbor, it is worth 1 minute of your life to ask who profits from the two of you being at each other's throats. Sometimes the answer is nobody. The anger may well be honest, in which case, go and settle it, go and talk to him. And sometimes the answer is somebody, and they are not standing anywhere near the argument. The fourth point, watch what an ideology does to its own before you judge what it will do to you. This is a very important one. The families driven out of Nishapur were Sunni. If you had been paying attention in 445, you would have known what was coming in 448. Not because you were a target, because you had seen the instrument in use. And fifth, which is the uncomfortable one. This state was run by men whose grandfather's religion nobody can name with confidence. Within 2 generations, they were deciding whose call to prayer was legitimate. Certainty arrives fast, and it arrives late. The most recently arrived are very often the most anxious to police the boundary. And that is a mechanism you can watch operating in Muslim communities all across the world in any decade that you care to name. I'm not going to supply you with examples, and I would ask you not to supply them either. The moment we start naming, we are doing the thing this majlis is fundamentally against. Please give me a salawat. We move to the second point, what they came for.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
So first I'm going to correct my own title. This sermon or majlis is called The Night the Books Burnt. Before I use that title, I'm going to correct it because it is wrong, and it is wrong in a way that matters. It was not a night, it was years. And the burning happened more times than once. Now, I could have kept quiet about that. The title is better than the truth as a piece of writing. And I chose it, and nobody in this room would have even known. But we don't do that here. And there is a second reason, which is the one that actually persuaded me. The truth is far more frightening. One night is a catastrophe. A community can survive a catastrophe, bury the dead, rebuild, and tell the story to your children of future generations. Years of it, coming back and coming back and coming back, this is not a catastrophe. This is policy. And a policy is designed to break you and make you leave. Everything in this section comes from one chronicle under 1 year, and that is the same one I've mentioned before, al-Muntazam fi Tarikh al-Muluk wal-Umam, the account of the history of the kings and the world by Ibn al-Jawzi. This is primarily from volume 16 under the year 448. This is a Sunni chronicle. So, the chief minister of the Khalif, and his details you can find in footnote number 2. I invite everyone to review the write-up for that. The chief minister of the Khalif gave orders that black banners, the Abbasid color, be raised in Karkh. The chroniclers record that the people of the quarter were distressed by it. Their flags on our roofs by order. And notice that the chronicler bothers to tell us it frightened them. He is not on our side, and he is not writing for us. And he writes it down anyway. Remember that. It becomes the argument of this whole point. Then you have the line taken out of the call to prayer. I'm quoting from Ibn al-Jawzi. You can find the reference in the write-up. He writes, and in this year, this is of course 448, and in this year the call to prayer was established at the shrine at Maqabir Quraysh, and at the shrine of al-Atiqa, and in the mosques of Karkh, with prayer is better than sleep, salatu khayrun min al-nawm, and what they used to use in the call to prayer, hayya ala khair al-amal, hasten to the best of activities, was removed. You can find the reference in the write-up. I told you earlier where Maqabir Quraysh is. It's Kadhamiyya, Kadhamain. So let's say it plainly and simply. By order of the government, the call to prayer was altered at the graves of the 7th and 9th Imams, peace and blessings be upon them. Then you have the words taken off the doors. Again, I'm quoting from Ibn al-Jawzi. You can find the reference in the write-up. And everything that was on the doors of the houses and at the heads of the lanes, Muhammad and Ali are the best of humankind, was torn off. So pause with me over here, because this is the center of the point. These were not government buildings. These were the doors of houses. Somebody walked down a residential street in Baghdad with a tool in his hand and went door by door by door and took a sentence off the thresholds of the families. Think about the man doing it. We'll meet him in the Maqtal. He's not a general. He's not a theologian. He's a workman with a chisel and a list of streets and houses. And at the end of the day, he goes home. And think about the family standing in the doorway watching him work. And then a killing. Again, I'm quoting from Ibn al-Jawzi. And the chief minister, you can find the reference in the write-up, and the chief minister ordered Ibn al-Naswi to kill somebody, the head of the drapers at Bab al-Taq, for the extremism in Raft which he was displaying openly. And he was killed and crucified at the door of his own shop. Now I've taken his name out of what I read to you. He was a victim and not a villain. But the general rule I've tried to keep in this majlis is that we don't hand people a name that they can latch onto. Because historically I've found the moment you give people a name, they stop seeing the mechanism. His name is not lost. It's written down in the footnotes at the bottom of the write-up, and I invite everyone to review it. And it's not just his name, with the other names that I've kept off the pulpit tonight. And anybody can find it in those write-ups. It simply will not be said from here. Now notice three things in that sentence, because all three matter. Number one, the order came from the Caliph's own chief minister, not from some Turkish general. The pen was Abbasi. 2, look at the charge. For what he was displaying openly. They use the word raft. This is a derogatory term that some of these systems, some of these regimes used against the Shia, the Rafidi. Maybe you've heard it. I'm not going to dwell on that term. But this man was not killed for a crime. He was killed for simply being visible. 3, and this is new to us tonight. He was the head of the drapers at Bab al-Taq. And Bab al-Taq is on the east bank. It is not in Karkh. So the measures were not confined to a single quarter. This was not a riot in a neighborhood that got out of hand. It reached across the river. And then one clause. And again, I'm reading from Ibn Jawzi. And Abu Ja'far al-Tusi fled, and his house was plundered. That's all he gets. 6 words of Arabic. 1 clause. The greatest scholar our school produced in that century, perhaps in many centuries, appears in the chronicle of his own city as a subordinate clause between 2 other events. He fled. We are not told where. We are not told what with. We are not told whether he took anything, or whether he had anywhere to go, or if anyone went with him. Just 6 words. And then you have Safar of the following year, the chair. And now the following year. And this, the chronicler gives its own chapter heading, which itself is worth noticing. Again, this is from Ibn al-Jawzi in his same volume 16, but his chronicles under the chapter 449. And the chapter title is, you can find the reference in the write-up, The Forcing of the House of Abu Ja'far al-Tusi in Karkh. He gave it a heading in his own book. Nobody made him. And then the entry. And again, the references are all in the write-up. He writes, in Safar of this year being 449, in Safar of this year, the house of Abu Ja'far al-Tusi, the theologian of the Shia in Karkh, was forced. What was found of his notebooks was seized, and a chair on which he used to sit for theology, and that was brought out into Karkh, and to it were added 3 white banners which the visitors from the people of Karkh used in the old days to carry with them when they set out for the visitation of Kufa, and all of it was burnt. There it is. That is the same sentence that we opened with. And now you know whose house it was and what year and who wrote it down. And now I owe you the thing I promised at the start of this night. Look at what I read you and look at what I translated. And you'll have... I said the word banners, but the book does not say banners. The word used in the books is majaniq. Majaniq means mangonels or siege engines. The great timber catapults that armies wheel up to a city wall and use to throw stones upon it. 3 white siege engines which the pilgrims used to carry with them when they went to visit Kufa would be the translation if I took the word majaniq. Now, and this is very, very interesting. Now sit with how strange that is for a moment before I resolve it, because the strangeness is the lesson. It cannot be right, and you don't need to know a word of Arabic to see why. 3 tests and the sentence fails in all 3. Number 1, it says they were white. Nobody has ever described a siege engine by its colour. It is timber and rope and iron. Cloth is white. You mention the colour of a thing when colour is the only thing it has. Number 2, it says the pilgrims carried them. A mangonel, a siege engine, is a machine. A big machine. It is built on site by a crew. You do not carry 3 of them to a shrine and then take them home again. Number 3, look at what it was burnt with. Notebooks, a teaching chair. Every other object on that list came out of a scholar's house. A siege engine is the one item that belongs to another world entirely. So what should it say? Sanajiq. Sanajiq. Sanajiq means banners. It is the plural of sanjak, a Turkic word for standard. Keep that in mind. Not the banner of an army, the cloth on a pole that a body of people carries so that the rest of them can see where the front is. The thing you look for when you've fallen behind on a road. 3 of them, white. Kept in a house between pilgrimages and brought out once a year. And here's how the mistake happened, and it is very human. A copyist is working through a chronicle, and a chronicle of that century is full of sieges. The word majaniq is on page after page after page. His hand knows it, his eye expects it. And then he meets sanajiq, a foreign word, a Turkish word, rare, in a hand that has been copied and recopied. And he writes the word he knows, majaniq, not out of malice, not even out of carelessness, but out of familiarity. He wrote what a man who had read 100 pages of war would expect to find. And then it was copied faithfully for 1,000 years. The modern editor prints it, and he's right to print it. An editor's duty is to what the manuscripts say, not to what they ought to say. Later Shia historians noticed and restored the reading and glossed it so that nobody would trip. 3 white sanajiq, that is, standards. Now let me tell you why I've spent 3 minutes of your evening on a single word. Because look at what happened to that sentence. It was written down truly. It was damaged in transmission by someone who could not imagine what he was reading. A man, the copyist, who had never walked to Najaf behind a white flag, meeting the description of it, reached instead for the nearest thing in his own experience, a weapon. And the damage did not destroy it, it survived. And we can see the damage and we can repair it for exactly one reason. Because enough people copied it. That is the whole of tonight, happening inside the evidence for tonight. They burnt the banners, and the sentence about the banners was itself half burnt in transmission. And both survived by the same method. Not because anybody protected them, because there were too many copies in too many hands. And there is a second report, and it's worse. This is quoted by another chronicler, Ibn Najjar. You can find the reference in the write-up. His being Abu Ja'far al-Tusi, Shaykh Tusi, his books were burnt several times over in the presence of the people in the plaza of the Nasr Mosque, and he went into hiding in fear for his life. Several times over. The word used is nuwab. A nawba is a turn that comes around. The word you use, for example, for a night watch, for a shift, for a fever that keeps returning. This was not one fire. This was almost a rota. And not in a back alley, in the plaza of the great mosque, in front of a crowd. And the last clause, he went into hiding in fear of his life. That is the state he was in, Shaykh al-Tusi. He was not offended. He was not inconvenienced. He had to go into hiding. Now I want you to look at the list. Not to feel it, but to look at it. The way you look at a shopping list somebody dropped in the street. A line in the call to prayer. A sentence chiseled off a doorframe. 3 pieces of white cloth on poles. A wooden chair. Some notebooks. Now tell me what that's worth. And be honest about the books before you answer, because I want this argument to be sound and not merely moving. Manuscripts in that century were among the most valuable movable objects a man could own. His notebooks were worth real money, and the people who took them knew it, which makes what they did with them worse, not better. But the chair, the 3 pieces of cloth on poles, the line in the adhan, tell me what those are worth. Nothing. Not a dirham. And I know what somebody is thinking, because I thought it too. The year before, the Chronicle says his house was plundered. It does. That was robbery, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But look at what they did the second time. They did not sell it. They carried it into the street and they set fire to it in front of everybody. You don't burn loot. Burning is not what you do to a thing that you want. Burning is what you do to a thing that you want gone. So this was not a robbery. And it was not even destruction, not really. It was in fact subtraction. Someone sat down and worked out what a community is actually made of, and then went and systematically removed those things one by one. Take the line out of what they say 5 times a day, you've taken their voice. Take the word off their doors, you've taken their confession. Take the banners off their pilgrimage road, you've taken away their direction. Take the chair out from under their teacher, you've taken their transmission. That is not a mob. A mob takes what it can carry, sells it, and goes home. That is somebody who understands the Shia. And that somebody made a list. And here is what I want this gathering to take out of the room tonight. And this is really important. What a tyranny reaches for first is a precise inventory of what it is afraid of. If you ever want to know what is actually load-bearing in your faith, in your ideology, what is holding the roof up, don't ask the scholar. Look at what the people who want it gone go for first. And now the verse. Again, Quran, Surah Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, second chapter of the Quran, verse 114, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And who is more unjust than the one who prevents the mosques of God from his name being mentioned in them and strives for their ruin? Those it was not for them to enter them except in fear. For them in this world is disgrace, and for them in the hereafter is a great punishment." Now let me be careful with that in front of you rather than behind you. I'm not going to tell you that this verse was written about Karkh like it's some prophecy. It's not that I'm being modest or anything, the commentary settles it against me. Allama Tabatabai says the referent is the pagans of Mecca before the migration. Allama writes, you can find the references in the write-up. The apparent sense of the context is that these are the disbelievers of Mecca before the migration. For these verses were revealed in the earliest period of the Messenger of God's arrival in Medina. And he points at the grammar to prove the event is closed. Again, you can find the reference in the write-up. It indicates that the event is past and finished because of his words, "it was." So the verse is not about Karkh, and no mosque in Karkh was pulled down, and nobody was stopped from saying the name of God in them. What I will tell you is that it names the instinct exactly. The person who cannot win a mosque decides instead to change what is said inside it. And now the lessons for our time. Two things, and they're both about what you would lose. The first, take the inventory of your own house. They worked out what the Shia were made of before they came. Could you? Could I? If somebody wanted to end this community, not kill it, just end it, what four things would they take? Not the building, never the building. What's the sentence over our door? What's the chair in our house? I would put it to you that in every generation, the chair is whoever is teaching the children. And that a community which could not tell you in the abstract how its own children are being taught has already lost the chair without anybody needing to burn it. The second, what is said over a threshold is not a declaration, is not a decoration. Somebody in Baghdad went house to house with a chisel over a sentence written above a door. That tells you those sentences were doing real work. And remember what the draper was killed for, not for a crime, but for what he was displaying openly. A community that writes what it believes where the street can read it has made a decision. That decision has costs. And in 448, the cost was collected. The question for us is not whether we would write it. It is whether we would still write it if it cost us something. And most of us have never had to find out, which is a mercy. And it is also a gap in our self-knowledge. Please give me a salawat. We move to the last point, which is the machine does not care whose hands are on it.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل.
So we've watched a community lose its voice, its confession, its direction, and its teacher in 3 years by order. Now I want to ask a colder question, and it is the question that will keep you from misusing everything I've just told you. Who did this? Not which men. What kind of thing? Because if the answer is a people, then tonight is a grievance, and you will carry out of here like a stone in your pocket. And if the answer is a mechanism, then it can come for anybody in any century wearing anybody's colors, including ours. And I'm going to show you that it is the second. And I'm going to show it to you using the 21 months that came next. So why they complied? One short section over here, but it's quite devastating. Because a question has been sitting there since I read you the first entry. Why did they do it? Why did the people of Karkh take the sentence off their own doors, because that's what some of them did, and stand in their own mosques and say a line that they did not believe in. Ibn al-Athir answers it, and he answers it in 3 words. In Arabic, 3 words. Out of fear of the Sultanate and its power. Not of a man and not of an army, of a sultana, the abstract noun, the sheer fact of there being a government, a regime. And then the second word, in case you thought the first was merely rhetorical. قوتها, its force. Not because they were persuaded, not because they'd lost any sort of argument, not because someone sat down with them and showed them a better proof, but because they were afraid of the government, of the regime. And in the same sentence, Ibn Athir supplies something that al-Jawzi, Ibn al-Jawzi, leaves in the passive. He names who gave the order for the adhan. He says, and you can find all these references in the write-up, and in that year the Khalif ordered it. The Khalif. Now notice who is telling us this. I want you to notice something about this entire session. Not one word of it has come from a Shia scholar or historian. Every single thing I've read to you tonight comes out of the sources of our brethren of the Sunnah. A Hanbali historian of Baghdad gave this episode its own heading in his own book. A Shafi'i hadith master 3 centuries later recorded the burning of the books in a work on the criticism of narrators. Nobody asked either of them to do this. Nobody was checking their work. There was no advantage in it for them either. And now I have to be honest with you about something, and it's not the thing you're expecting. They do not condemn it. I looked. I went specifically because it would have been a wonderful thing to read to you. Ibn al-Jawzi reports it flatly without a word of protest. Others narrate the whole period with something close to satisfaction. One of them even records the reason for a man's execution as the extremism he was displaying. That is the chronicler's own judgment of the victim. It is not mine. But they wrote it down, and that is enough. In fact, it's better than enough. I'm not asking anybody here, or anybody watching this afterwards, to take any source on Trust Tonight. Especially don't take a Shia source on Trust Tonight about these issues. We never needed one. Now what happened next, and this is the section that stops tonight from being a grievance. 21 months, that's the interval. Not 2 years, not a generation, 21 months after they burnt the chair in the street. In Dhul Qada, the 11th month of the year, 450, around December of 1058, the commanders who had taken the Fatimid coin enters Baghdad with the Egyptian banners flying. And Ibn al-Jawzi records this. You can find the reference again in the write-up. He says, and the people of Karkh came out to meet him, and he stood in the face of his horse and begged him to pass through their quarter. Of course they did. Hayya ala khair al-amal, hasten to good activities, comes back into the call to prayer. The Friday sermon in Baghdad is read for the Fatimid Khalif in Cairo. The Abbasid Khalif is taken out of his own capital. He is held up at the Euphrates in a place called Hadithat Ana for a full year in the keeping of a Bedouin lord, who the chronicler is careful to say treated him well. And Ibn al-Jawzi records the prayer the Khalif made in exile. And I'm going to read you the prayer. You can find the reference in the write-up. He says, the Khalif prayed, O God, return me to my homeland and gather me together with my family and my children. Then it turns again, because it always turns. Dhul Qada of the year 451. Tughril Beg comes back. The Khalif re-enters his palace, with the Sultan holding his mule's bridle. The commander is hunted down and killed in Dhul Hijra of the same year, 451, and his head is displayed in Baghdad. And the chief minister, the man whose orders began this whole account, who had the banners raised and the doors chiseled and the draper killed, he didn't survive the reversal either. He was handed over and paraded and put to death. The chronicles describe how, with some relish. I'm not going to. Because if I read you the burning of that chair, and then read you a Khalif praying to be allowed home to his children, and I enjoy the second one, then I have not understood a single thing about the night I have just spent an hour describing to you. I would just be waiting my turn. I have read you his prayer. Did it sound like a stranger's prayer to you? O God, return me to my homeland and gather me together with my family and my children. There is not one person here who has not made such a prayer in some form about something. What we are looking at tonight is not a wrong done by one community to another. It is a mechanism. It is what happens when a state decides that a religious question can be settled by force, or any question can be settled by force. And the mechanism does not care whose hands are on it. It worked perfectly for them in 449. It worked perfectly for the Shia, for us, in 450. Both times the people who paid the price were the ordinary. A draper in his shop door, a family in a doorway, an old man on the Euphrates asking to see his children. That is why we say it every single week. It's not Shia against Sunni. It is truth against the abuse of truth. And one more thing was lost. There was a library in Karkh. It had been founded by a Buyid vizier, someone called Sabur ibn Ardashir, in the quarter called Bayn al-Surayn, and it was endowed as a waqf for the jurists. The chroniclers count it in the tens of thousands of volumes and 100 copies of the Quran in the hand of Banu Muqla, who were among the great calligraphers of that age. The geographer Yaqut al-Hamawi, you can find the reference in the write-up, is reported to have said there was nothing better in the world, and to have given the reason, and the reason is quite lovely. The books were the scholars' own original copies in their own handwriting. Not copies of copies, the original manuscripts themselves. And Ibn Athir records what became of it under the year 451. You can find the reference in the write-up. And in it burnt the treasury of books which the vizier Sabur ibn Ardashir had given in endowment. Around 10,400 volumes in the scholar's own hands. And every single one of them was a copy that somebody had made and carried and kept. Hold that thought until next week. It's going to matter more than anything else that I've said tonight, especially for what we cover in the next session. This was supposed to be, next week and this week was supposed to be a single session, but it would have been far longer than it already is. So now the lesson for our time. 3 of them, and for everyone, and every one of them is a warning against the easiest reading of tonight. The first, do not accept a grievance where a mechanism is an offer. Somebody will take tonight's material and use it perhaps as fuel. That is the easiest possible reading of this evening, and it is the wrong one. And the proof that it is wrong is inside the sermon. 21 months later, on our side, we had the machinery and used it, and a Khalif was praying to be let home to his children. The lesson is not look at what they did to us. The lesson is look at what the machine does, then refuse to be the hand on that machine. The second, fear of the state is not the same thing as being convinced. Out of fear of the Sultanate and its power, they changed what they said out loud. They did not change what they believed. And we know that because the moment the pressure came off in 450, the words came straight back. Strategic prudence, taqiyya, something we spent many sessions discussing at great depth, is not surrender. And I invite everyone to go back and review the sessions that we've done on taqiyya. Taqiyya is not surrender. It never was. But it's not without cost either. And this session shows you the bill. A generation of children grew up in Karkh hearing a call to prayer with a line missing from it. What you stop saying in front of others, your children may never learn to say at all. And third, which is the one that costs us something. Every one of us can think of a place where our own communities, institutions treat a difference of opinion as a matter for authority rather than a matter for argument. I'm not going to describe it, and I would rather you did not either. The instinct that burned that chair is not a foreign instinct. It is a human one, and it is in us. It is not scale that makes it a different thing. It is opportunity. Please give me a salawat. We move to the conclusion and the key takeaways.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأجل.
So 3 things to take home. Number 1, a state does not have to hate you in order to destroy you. So verify the report before you decide which one it was. The Seljuks were sent for. The orders were Abbasid. The first religious purge that the Seljuks carried out fell on Sunni scholars in Naishapur, 2 years before it came to the Shia in Baghdad. And the version of this night that most of our people carry in their heads was accepted without anybody checking it about our own history, about our own dead. Number 2, what a tyranny reaches for is a precise inventory of what you are actually made of. A line in the call to prayer, a sentence off a doorframe, 3 pieces of cloth on poles, a chair, not 1 dirham of value in any of it. They were not robbing a house. They were subtracting a community, its voice, its confession, its direction, its transmission. If you want to know what is holding your own roof up, look at what the people who want it gone go for first. And 3, it is a mechanism and it does not care whose hands are on it. It worked perfectly for them in 449 and it worked perfectly for us in 450. Both times ordinary people paid. A draper at his shop door, a family in a doorway, an old man on the Euphrates asking to be let home to his family. Not Shia against Sunni, truth against the abuse of truth. And the title, which is where we started, The Night the Books Burnt. It was not a night, and I told you so before I used it. It was years. And tonight I have shown you only what was taken. Next week, what could not be taken. And it turns out to be a piece of paper. Please give me a salawat and we move to the eulogy, what was lost, Karkh, the books and the scholars of the quarter.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Let me stay in that street a little longer than the Chronicle does, because Ibn al-Jawzi gives us the list and he gives us the year and then he moves on to the next entry. He was not writing a lament. Somebody has to. Start with the man at the shop door, the head of the drapers, a tradesman at Bab al-Taq on the East Bank, who sold cloth for a living and who had never in his life given anybody an order. And they killed him, and they nailed him up to the door of his own shop so that his customers would have to walk past him. He is not named from this pulpit, but he had a name, and a wife, and a street that knew him, and a stock of cloth that somebody had to come and clear out afterwards. He was killed for what he was displaying openly. That is the whole charge. He was visible. Now the doorway. Somewhere in Karkh, there is a woman standing in a doorway, watching a workman with a chisel take a sentence off the lintel above her head. She did not put it there. Her husband's father put it there, or his father did. She has walked under it every day of her married life. It comes off in pieces. He sweeps it up. He goes home to his own family. And she goes back inside. She goes back inside a house that has stopped saying anything. Now the children. There is a generation of children in that quarter who learnt the call to prayer in the year after 448. They learnt it with a line missing. They stood in the mosque beside their fathers and heard a line their fathers had grown up with and did not know it had been taken out, because nobody was going to explain it to a child in a year like that. Some of those children got the line back in 450. Some of them were grown by then. Some of them, we must assume, never said it at all. That is a loss with no monument on it and no entry in any chronicle. And now the library. Sabur ibn Ardashir's endowment in Bayn al-Surayn, given as a waqf for the jurists, books in the tens of thousands, 100 copies of the Quran in the hand of the great calligraphers of that age. And this is the part I keep returning to, the scholars' own manuscripts, not copies, the originals, in the hands that actually wrote them. Every single volume in that room was a copy somebody had made. A man sat with a reed and an inkwell and gave months of his eyesight to it. Somebody paid for the paper, somebody carried it across the street or across a desert. Somebody's father left it to somebody's son, and it went in an afternoon. Do not let anybody tell you a burned library is a loss of information. It is not. It is a loss of labor. Thousands of quiet lifetimes of it, from people who did the work knowing they would never be thanked, and they were not, and their reward is with God. And now the quarter itself. Karkh was not a symbol. It was a place where people bought cloth and argued about prices and got married and buried their parents. It had lanes with names. It had a body of pilgrims who went to Kufa together, badly organized and glad of each other, carrying 3 white flags so the slow ones could see where the front was. Those flags were kept somewhere between pilgrimages. Somebody folded them and put them away each year and got them out the next. And a man carried them into the street and threw them in the fire and was pleased with himself. And to the north of it all, at Maqabir Quraysh, Kadhimiyyah, lay Imam Musa al-Kadhim and Imam Jawad, peace and blessings be upon them both. And by order of the regime, the government, the call to prayer was altered over their graves. We were not there. And I will not pretend we would have been braver than the people who took the sentence off their own doors because they were afraid of the government, and perhaps so are we. And they got the words back the moment they could, and I hope we would have done the same. But they are ours. The draper is ours. The women in the doorway are ours. The children with the missing line are ours. The copiers whose eyesight went into that library are ours. And 1,000 years later, in a language they never heard, we are still saying so. Please give me a salawat and we'll segue across to the maqtal. But before we start, just a brief point about the voice that you're about to hear. Before it begins, let me tell you honestly what you're about to hear, because you should really never be in any doubt about it. That is not a reciter, it is not a person. It is a voice made for this series in clear English, belonging to no living man. An imagining of the voice of the Imam of our age, may our souls be his ransom and may God hasten his return, speaking from behind the veil of his absence, looking back across the years at people he was watching the whole time. It is a vessel for his words. It is nothing more than that, and we will not pretend it is anything more than that. And tonight, he does not speak about the scholar. He speaks about the workman, about the man who was given a list of streets and a tool and went down a residential lane in Baghdad, taking a sentence off the top of one door after another, and who finished at the end of the afternoon, put the chisel in his bag and went home to his own family, past his own door. Because somebody had to do it. It is never only the man who gives the order. Let us listen to the man with the chisel. Please give me a salawat and we segue across to the maqtal.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل.
Okay, so we now have a short supplication for the ones who carried it, and then we'll break for Maghrib, and then we have a nasheed, and then Ziyarat Ali Yasin in English, and then the program will conclude. So, in the name of God, the Lord of the martyrs and the truthful, O God, we have nowhere to go but your door. O God, peace be upon your prophets, upon Adam and Noah, and Abraham, and Ishmael and Isaac, and Moses and Aaron, and David and Solomon, and Zechariah and John, and Jesus the son of Mary, peace and blessings be upon them all. Every one of them was sent to bring people out of the darknesses and into the light, and every one of them left no dinar or no dirham behind. And peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad, and upon his family, and upon his righteous companions, who was buried in the room he died in, and gave this little series its name. O God, peace be upon Sayyidah Fatimah al-Zahra, in whose house this whole inheritance began. And peace be upon the commander of the faithful, at whose grave a broken man built a house and would not leave it. And peace be upon Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein, the master of the witnesses. And peace be upon Imam Musa al-Kadhim and upon Imam Muhammad al-Jawad, over whose graves the government altered the call to prayer and could not alter what was in the mouths that said it. Peace be upon the Imams of guidance, one after the other, who told us to guard our books and to scatter our knowledge amongst our brethren, as we will learn next week, and who said it 300 years before anybody came with a fire. O God, tonight we ask you for the ones who carried it, for the draper at his shop door, killed for what he was displaying openly, for the families who stood in their doorways and watched a workman take a sentence off the lintel and who said nothing, because they were afraid of the regime of the government, and who put it back the moment that they could. For the children of that quarter who learnt the call to prayer with a line missing from it, and for the ones who never learnt the line at all. For the copyists, for the men who gave their eyesight to a page so that somebody they would never meet could read it. For everything that burned in Bayn as-Surayn in that afternoon, and for every hand that had written it. And for the old man in Kashan who we'll learn about in the next session with a shaky hand, certifying a book to a stranger who had walked 400 miles to read it out loud to him. For the ones on the roads with paper in their bags, who did not know there had been a fire, and who were the reason that it did not matter. Accept it from them, O God. They did it for us, and they never met us, and they did it for you. O God, a teacher of ours lost everything he owned in the space of 2 years, and went into hiding in fear for his life. And he walked south, and sat down again in a desert town, and started teaching before the ash was cold. Make us people who sit down again. O God, we pray to you for Imam Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei. May you protect him, the Wali al-Faqih of our time. Preserve him for us, strengthen him, guide him. Make him the leader you have appointed him to be. Protect him from the enemies, until the Imam of our age returns and the trust he carries is handed back to its rightful holder. O God, hasten the return of the Imam of our age. May our souls be his ransom. They thought your candle was a light, your light was a candle, and they brought a fire to it. And they were standing in the street when it had already gone past them in 40 different directions. You have said in the Quran, they desire to extinguish the light of God with their mouths, and God will perfect his light, however much the disbelievers hate it. O God, complete it. And whether or not we live to see it completed, let us be found carrying it. Make us of his helpers, make us of his soldiers, make us of those who, when he calls, are already standing. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. Wa akhiru da'wani and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.